Have you ever loved someone so deeply that even time could not erase their presence? Have you ever lost something so precious, yet felt their spirit lingering as if they never truly left? This is not just a story about two pit bulls. This is a story about love, devotion, and a promise that transcended life itself. Valentino and Seraphina were more than performers in a fading circus. They were partners, bound by something no audience could ever fully understand. But fate is cruel, and life does not always allow happy endings. What happens when a love that was meant to last forever is torn apart? And what if, just for a fleeting moment, against all odds, destiny allows them to reunite for one final dance? Before we dive into this powerful story, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe to Veil Marks. Your support will help this channel reach 1,000 followers, a milestone that means the world to me. It's your encouragement that allows me to create more meaningful, emotional, and high-quality videos like this. Stay with us until the end, because this is a story you will never forget. The old circus tent stood like a forgotten relic against the night sky, its once bright colors now faded to muted shades of red and gold. The air was thick with the scent of dust and aged wood, and the fabric of the tent swayed gently in the evening breeze. It had been years since the Golden Mirage Circus had seen a full house. Once, it had been a place of wonder, where children gasped in awe and adults let themselves believe in magic, even if just for a little while. But times had changed. The world no longer seemed enchanted by the spectacle of traveling performers. Inside, the grand stage still held remnants of its former glory. The wooden floor bore the scuffs and scratches of 1,000 performances. The velvet curtains sagged from years of use, and the chandeliers above, though dusty, still cast a dim golden glow over the arena. And beneath that light, two shadows moved in perfect harmony. Valentino and Seraphina. To the outside world, they were merely pit bulls, two trained animals in an act designed to charm the dwindling audience. But to those who had seen them dance, they were something more. They were poetry in motion, two souls entwined in a rhythm only they understood. Valentino was a striking figure, his sleek black coat shimmering under the soft glow of the stage lights. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a performer who knew his role by heart. His muscles rippled beneath his fur, his movements sharp, yet fluid. His every step exuding a strength honed over years of practice. And yet, beyond his powerful frame, there was something else, an unshakable faith. A belief in something beyond the stage, beyond the performance. A belief in love. Seraphina, in contrast, moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Her white fur glowed like moonlight against the darkened stage, a single streak of black curling over one eye like the stroke of an artist's brush. She was delicate but not fragile, every motion precise, every turn effortless. Her paws barely made a sound as she glided across the floor, her eyes locked onto Valentino's, reflecting his every movement, his every breath. They were opposites, light and shadow, strength and elegance, yet together they were seamless. From the sidelines, Elena watched them with quiet pride. She had raised them, trained them, loved them as if they were her own. She had been just a young trainer when she first took them in, two abandoned pups, too small to fend for themselves, too wild to be tamed. But she had seen something in them, something rare. She had taught them not just tricks, not just routines, but the art of expression. And they had learned, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because for them, the dance was more than performance. It was their way of speaking, their way of feeling. "Beautiful," she whispered, though no one else was there to hear her. On the opposite side of the stage, Marco stood with his arms crossed, his gaze heavy with something far less sentimental. He had once been a man of vision, a lover of the spectacle, but time had worn him down. The circus was dying, The crowds were thinning, and money was scarce. The magic was slipping through his fingers like grains of sand, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hold on to it. And yet, even Marco couldn't deny the magic in this moment. The music swelled, filling the empty space with a melody that echoed through the tent. It was a slow, melancholic waltz, one that had played for years, one that had become synonymous with Valentino and Seraphina. And as soon as the first note struck, they moved. Valentino took the lead, his steps precise yet gentle, guiding Seraphina across the floor with the practiced ease of a seasoned partner. She followed instinctively, her body flowing in sync with his, their movements so perfectly timed it was as if they shared the same heartbeat. They spun, they turned, they leapt. Valentino lifted onto his hind legs, his front paws reaching forward as if to embrace Seraphina. She rose to meet him, their chests nearly touching, their heads tilting in a perfect mirror of one another. They twirled, their bodies intertwining like strands of silk, the world around them fading until there was only the music, only the dance. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She had seen them perform countless times, yet it never ceased to move her. There was something deeply human about them, something more than mere training. It was love. Not just the love of a dance, not just the love of a shared art, but something deeper, something unspoken. But no matter how beautiful, no matter how perfect, the moment could not last forever. As the final note played, Valentino and Seraphina slowed. Their movements softened, their breath mingling as they stood still for the briefest of seconds, staring into each other's eyes as if sealing a silent promise between them. Then, together, they lowered themselves to the ground, the performance complete. A single clap echoed through the empty tent. It was Marco. His expression was unreadable, his hands slow and deliberate as he clapped. The sound was hollow, lacking the warmth of true appreciation. "It's beautiful," he said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. He turned to Elena, his voice lowering. "But beauty doesn't pay the bills." Elena stiffened, her fingers curling at her sides. She knew what he meant. The circus was on its last legs. Money was running dry, and in a world where spectacle no longer captivated the masses, sacrifices had to be made. A chill ran through her as she looked at Valentino and Seraphina, still standing in the glow of the stage lights, oblivious to the weight of the world pressing down on them. They had no idea that this performance, this dance, might be their last. And that knowledge settled over Elena like a storm cloud, dark and heavy with the inevitable. She swallowed hard. No matter what happened next, she had to protect them, even if it meant breaking their hearts. The air inside the circus tent was heavier than usual, thick with the weight of impending loss. The once grand stage, where laughter and applause had once roared, now stood in eerie silence. Dust particles swirled in the fading light, settling over empty seats, abandoned props, and the ghosts of performances long past. Elena paced anxiously near the back of the tent, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum of war. She had heard the whispers, the debts, the desperate measures Marco had been forced to consider, but she never thought it would come to this. Not Valentino. Not him. The sound of approaching footsteps sent a chill down her spine. Marco emerged from behind the curtain, his expression unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. Behind him, a man followed, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat, his presence heavy with an air of transaction rather than appreciation. Elena's pulse quickened. "No," she breathed, stepping forward. "You can't do this." Marco exhaled, as if exhausted by her resistance before it had even begun. "Elena, the circus is dying. We barely have enough to feed ourselves, let alone the animals. This is the only way." "The only way?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "Valentino isn't just some animal. He's family. He belongs here, with Seraphina." With us. The man in the dark coat crossed his arms, unimpressed with her outburst. I was told this would be a simple exchange, he muttered, looking at Marco impatiently. Elena turned to Valentino, who stood beside Seraphina, ears perked, tail still. He wasn't a fool. He understood something was wrong. He could see it in Elena's clenched fists, in the way Seraphina pressed against his side as if trying to shield him from the inevitable. Elena knelt beside him, gripping his face gently between her hands, her fingers buried in the smooth black fur she had known since he was a puppy. "Please," she whispered, looking deep into those dark, intelligent eyes. "Don't take him away." For the first time, Marco hesitated. His fingers twitched at his sides, his gaze shifting between the woman he had known for years and the dog that had been a centerpiece of their once glorious performances. But hesitation was not the same as mercy. With a stiff nod, Marco signaled to one of the handlers, and before Elena could react, a leash was slipped around Valentino's neck. The moment it tightened, Seraphina lunged. A desperate snarl tore from her throat as she snapped at the handler's hands, her body pushing against Valentino as if she could keep him there by sheer force of will. But the chains around her collar pulled taut, yanking her back just before her teeth could find their mark. Her cry was one of pure anguish. Valentino turned sharply, nudging her with his nose, his body tense but calm. She whined, struggling against the restraint, but he did not fight. He did not struggle. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. A second. That was all they had. Then the leash pulled, and Valentino was forced away. Elena screamed his name, running forward, but the handler blocked her path. She fought, clawing at his grip, but he was stronger. The man in the dark coat turned without another word, leading Valentino toward the exit. And still, Valentino did not fight. His steps were steady. His tail did not tuck. He glanced back only once, locking eyes with Seraphina. There was no fear in them, only a promise. "I will come back." And then he was gone. The tent flap fell shut behind him, sealing the silence inside. Seraphina let out a howl so broken, so raw, that it sent shivers through the empty seats. She thrashed against her chains, her body shaking with panic, with heartbreak, but the metal would not give. Elena dropped to her knees beside her, wrapping her arms around the trembling dog. Her tears soaked into the white fur beneath her chin, her own body shaking as she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Seraphina's breathing was ragged, her chest rising and falling too quickly, her muscles tensed as if ready to lunge again. But the fight had already been lost, and so slowly, painfully, she sank down onto the stage where they had danced, the stage where they had been whole. Her golden eyes stared blankly ahead, fixed on the entrance where Valentino had disappeared. She did not blink. She did not move. Hours passed. The last traces of daylight faded through the gaps in the tent's fabric, casting elongated shadows across the empty arena. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, but within these walls, time had stopped. Seraphina refused to eat that night, or the night after. She refused to move from her spot on the stage, as if staying there meant he would find his way back. Elena tried. She brought food, water, treats, all of which were ignored. She stayed by Seraphina's side, whispering softly, stroking her fur, but nothing reached her. It was as if part of her had been ripped away, leaving behind only the shell of the graceful dancer she once was. And the circus, already teetering on the brink of collapse, felt the weight of her grief. Where once there had been music, there was now silence. Where once the stage had been filled with movement, there was now only stillness. Days turned to weeks, and yet Seraphina remained. The stage lights no longer shone. The music had long since stopped, but she was still there, curled in the same spot, waiting. waiting for the only partner she had ever known, waiting for a promise to be kept. And though the world may have moved on, though the circus may have crumbled around her, Seraphina would not forget. Because somewhere out there, beneath a different sky, Valentino was fighting his own battles, and she believed, with every fiber of her being, that one day he would find his way back home. Valentino didn't understand where he was being taken. The car rattled over uneven roads, the scent of gasoline thick in the air. His body swayed with each jolt, but his mind remained fixed on one thing: Seraphina. He had promised he would come back. But how? And when? He tried to keep her face in his mind, the soft white fur, the dark mark curling around her eye, the way she moved like a whisper through the air. But as the miles stretched between them, as the world outside the window blurred into something unrecognizable, she felt further and further away. By the time the car stopped, the scent of rust and sweat hit him like a wall. The door swung open, and rough hands dragged him out. The man who had bought him, dark coat, sharp eyes, exchanged a few words with another figure, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek. The second man looked Valentino over, then yanked his leash, leading him through a set of heavy metal doors. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the stench of blood, dirt, and something far worse: fear. The place was nothing like the circus. There were no bright lights, no music, no Elena watching from the sidelines with quiet pride. The floor wasn't smooth wood, but hard concrete, stained with the evidence of past battles. Cages lined the walls, filled with dogs of all sizes, some growling, some trembling, all waiting for whatever fate had in store for them. Valentino tensed. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. He was pushed into a cage, the latch clicking shut behind him. A low growl rumbled from the kennel beside his, a hulking beast with matted fur and scars crisscrossing his body. Valentino met the dog's gaze, but there was no recognition, no camaraderie, only survival. This was not a place for dancers. The first time they forced him into the ring, he didn't fight. He didn't understand what they wanted from him. The other dog, a snarling, wild-eyed creature, lunged, teeth flashing. Valentino dodged, his movements instinctively smooth, his body twisting the way it had on stage. But there was no applause, no cheers. Only the cruel snap of a whip and the roars of men demanding blood. Pain exploded through him as teeth sank into his shoulder. He cried out, staggering. The crowd cheered. That was when he understood. This was no stage. This was survival. And survival meant fighting. Night after night, he was thrown into the ring. The wounds piled on, scars layering over scars. His muscles grew harder, his steps heavier. The grace that once defined him faded, replaced by something else, something cold, something necessary. Yet no matter how deep he was forced into this world, no matter how many fights he endured, he never lost her. Seraphina. The memory of her was his lifeline. In the rare moments of quiet, when he curled up in his cage, licking his wounds, he would close his eyes and imagine her beside him. Her warmth, the way she pressed her head against his before each performance, the way they had moved as one. She was his last tether to the life he had once known. But even memories, when left too long in the dark, begin to fade. Miles away, beneath a very different sky, Seraphina still waited. Elena had taken her away from the circus when it finally collapsed, when Marco sold the last of the animals and locked the doors forever. She had driven Seraphina across state lines to a quiet sanctuary for rescued animals, a place where she would be safe, where she would be loved. But Seraphina didn't want safe. She wanted Valentino. The sanctuary was kind. The people were gentle. They fed her, stroked her fur, spoke to her in soft voices. But no one understood. No one knew that half of her was missing. Each day she scanned the faces of the other dogs, hoping, searching. But he was never there. Nights were the hardest. The rain would come, drumming softly against the roof of the shelter, and Seraphina would retreat to the window. She would press her nose to the glass, watching the storm blur the world outside. She would remember the way the rain had once tapped against the circus tent, the way she and Valentino had danced despite the thunder, despite the chill. She would remember the promise in his eyes as they took him away, and she would wonder, did he still remember? Or had the world taken him so far from her that even she had become just a shadow in his mind? Weeks turned into months. Valentino no longer flinched when the cage door opened. He no longer hesitated when the leash was clipped around his neck. He fought. He survived. But there were nights when something in him cracked, when he would wake up panting, his body tensed as if preparing for something softer, something warmer, something that no longer existed. And for the first time he was afraid, not of the fights, not of the men who owned him, but of the day when he would wake up and realize he had forgotten her completely. That day had not come yet, but the fear of it loomed. And somewhere, beneath a rainy sky, Seraphina sat by the window, staring out into the night, waiting for a soul that no longer knew the way home. The rain had been falling for hours, soaking the cracked pavement and turning the dirt roads into streams of mud. The sky was a dull, endless gray, pressing down on the world with a quiet, unshakable heaviness. In the back of a rusted transport van, Valentino lay motionless, his body barely more than skin and bones, his breath shallow. His once glossy black coat was now dull, patched with scars and streaks of gray. The fire that had once burned so brightly in his eyes had dimmed, flickering like a candle in its final hours. He had lost count of how long he had been in that dark, hopeless place. The underground world of dogfights, survival measured in scars and the will to endure. He had fought, he had survived. But at what cost? His body was spent, his spirit broken. For so long he had dreamed of something, someone, but the image had become blurry, distant, like a song he used to know but could no longer hum. Then, out of the darkness, hands had lifted him. Gentle hands, not the cruel ones he had known for so long. Voices murmured around him, soft voices full of something unfamiliar, kindness. The van slowed, the doors opened, and the scent of fresh air flooded his senses. It was cool, clean, carrying hints of pine and damp earth. The hands lifted him again, cradling his frail body as if he were something precious rather than something discarded. A woman's voice, trembling yet strong, spoke his name. Valentino. His ears twitched at the sound. He knew that voice. He opened his eyes slowly, the world coming into focus in hazy shapes and muted colors. And then he saw her. Elena. Her face had changed. Lines creased her once youthful skin, and there was a sorrow in her eyes that hadn't been there before. But her hands, her touch, her scent, it was all the same. The same warmth that had once held him after every performance, the same voice that had whispered encouragement before each show. She knelt beside him, pressing her forehead against his, just as she had done so many years ago. Her tears soaked into his fur, but he did not move. He had no strength left to move. "I found you," she whispered. "I found you, my boy." He closed his eyes, listening to her voice, trying to remember the last time he had heard something so soft, so filled with love. Then another name was spoken, a name that stirred something deep inside him, something buried beneath years of pain and survival. Seraphina. His eyes snapped open. The drive back to the rescue center was long, the roads winding through open fields and quiet countryside. Valentino lay in the back seat, wrapped in blankets, his body too weak to do anything but exist. But inside, something had shifted. The name. It echoed through him, unlocking doors he had thought long since closed. Seraphina, white fur, dark eyes, a dancer's grace, a promise whispered beneath the glow of stage lights. Could she still be waiting? The car pulled up to the shelter and Elena stepped out, cradling him as she carried him through the front doors. The smell of warm hay and fresh food filled the air, but he hardly noticed, because at the end of the hall, standing perfectly still, was her, Seraphina. She had aged, just as he had. Her once brilliant white coat had faded slightly, and her frame had softened with time. But her eyes, the same golden eyes that had watched him through every performance, were exactly as he remembered. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, like a whisper through the wind, she took a step forward. She sniffed the air cautiously, as if afraid this was a trick, a cruel dream that would shatter upon touch. Then another step, and another. And then she was there, standing right before him. Valentino struggled to lift his head. He wanted to move, to greet her, to press his forehead to hers, the way they had done all those years ago, but his body betrayed him. His legs trembled, refusing to support him. Seraphina whimpered, her nose brushing against his scarred cheek. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of her, the only thing that had ever truly felt like home. Then, somewhere in the room, a speaker crackled to life. Music. Soft at first, then growing, filling the space with something achingly familiar. Their song. The song they had danced to 1,000 times. The song of their youth, their love, their promise. Seraphina let out a soft, broken sound, half a whine, half a whisper. And then, ever so gently, she moved. She stepped back, her body instinctively falling into the first movement of their dance. Her paws glided across the floor, hesitant at first, then surer, as if muscle memory had never truly left her. She turned in a slow spin, waiting, hoping. But Valentino did not move. His body, once so strong, could not rise to meet her. His eyes flickered, searching hers, desperate to explain what his limbs could not. Seraphina froze. Then, with a tenderness that shattered the hearts of those watching, she lowered herself to the floor beside him. If he could not stand, she would dance beside him. She leaned into him, her head resting against his, their bodies close, just as they had been in the final beats of every performance. And though his legs could not carry him, though his strength had long since faded, for the first time in years, Valentino felt whole again. Because she had waited, because she still remembered, because she still loved him, even when the dance was over. The night was still. The world had quieted, as if holding its breath. A pale silver moon hung low in the sky, casting soft light across the open field behind the shelter. The grass shimmered, wet with dew, stretching endlessly into the darkness beyond. It was a night that felt untouched by time, a night where past and present blurred, where memories became reality. And beneath that moon, two figures stood, two dancers, reunited at last. Seraphina nudged Valentino gently, her golden eyes searching his. His body was frail, his limbs trembling beneath his own weight, but in that moment, he was more alive than he had been in years. She could see it in his eyes, the same fire, the same devotion, the same unbreakable love. She stepped closer, brushing her nose against his, urging him forward, whispering without words, "One more time, just one more dance." For a moment he hesitated. His legs, once powerful, once capable of lifting him effortlessly through elegant routines, were now weak, uncertain. But when the wind shifted, carrying the soft, ghostly echo of music, their music, through the night, something in him stirred. With a deep, steadying breath, he lifted his front paw and placed it forward. A step. Seraphina mirrored him, taking a step back, her tail curling gently, her movements as fluid as they had always been. Another step. Her body brushed against his, guiding him, supporting him. And then, slowly, like the unfurling of an old, cherished memory, they danced. The ground beneath them was no longer dirt and grass. The moonlight became stage lights, and the whispering wind became the hum of an audience holding its breath. For them, the shelter faded, the years disappeared, and they were once again in the golden glow of the circus tent, moving in perfect harmony. Seraphina led with gentle patience, adjusting her pace to match his, her movements slow and deliberate, waiting for him to catch up. And though Valentino's steps were shaky, though his body threatened to betray him at every turn, he followed. Because this was her. Because this was them. Because some promises, no matter how much time had passed, could never be broken. Their movements were not as grand as they had once been. There were no daring spins, no dramatic leaps. But what they lacked in spectacle, they made up for in something far greater: love. Valentino no longer needed to be strong. He no longer needed to impress, to perform, to endure. He only needed to be here, beside her, feeling the warmth of her body, the rhythm of her heart, the certainty that she had never stopped waiting. Each step was a whisper, a memory, a silent vow. I never forgot you. I never stopped loving you. I'm home. The music, whether real or imagined, swelled. The moonlight draped over them like a curtain falling on their final performance. And for those few minutes, time bent to their will. But time, no matter how kind in fleeting moments, cannot be stopped forever. Valentino's steps slowed. His legs grew heavier. His breathing became labored. Seraphina felt it before she saw it, the slight hesitation, the weight pressing more against her. She turned to him, her heart pounding. His dark eyes met hers, filled not with fear but with peace. A soft smile touched his face. The same look he had given her every night before their performances, the same look that had always said, "Trust me." She wanted to deny it. She wanted to push forward, to keep moving, to keep him moving. But his steps had become shorter, his strength fading with every heartbeat. And then, just as they reached the end of the routine, just as the music of the past would have slowed into silence, Valentino took one final step. And then he stopped. His body swayed. His legs gave way. Seraphina caught him before he could fall, pressing herself against him, refusing to let him go, refusing to let him slip away. His head rested against her chest, his breath warm against her fur. She could feel his heartbeat, slow but steady, matching hers. Seraphina held him tighter. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You kept your promise." She felt his body relax, his breath settling into something softer, something peaceful. She pressed her forehead against his, the same way he had done all those years ago before they had been torn apart. His body, once so full of life, so full of fight, now rested against hers, safe, whole, loved. A single tear slipped down her muzzle, landing in the soft fur of his cheek. "Rest now, my love," she murmured. "You're home." And as the night stretched on, as the wind carried away the last echoes of their dance, Seraphina lay beside Valentino beneath the stars. Their final performance had ended. But their love, their story, would never fade. The night had deepened, stretching its vast expanse over the quiet fields, wrapping the world in a solemn hush. The moon hung heavy in the sky, its glow casting long silver shadows over the grass, illuminating the two figures lying side by side, one still, one trembling. Seraphina did not move. Her body curled protectively around Valentino, as if shielding him from the cold, as if holding him close would bring him back. But there was no breath against her fur, no rise and fall of his chest. She nudged him gently, a quiet whimper slipping from her throat. Nothing. Her body tensed, her golden eyes searching for something, some flicker of life, some sign that this wasn't real, that the night hadn't stolen him away. But reality settled in, pressing against her like an unbearable weight. Valentino was gone, yet she did not leave him. She would not. Elena knelt beside them, her hands shaking as she reached out, pressing them against Seraphina's quivering form. Her touch was warm, but it could not warm the emptiness spreading through Seraphina's chest, could not fill the space where Valentino should have been. Tears slid down Elena's cheeks, falling onto the soft fur beneath her fingertips. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. Seraphina did not lift her head. She only pressed herself closer, as if she could will her heartbeat into his, as if she could give him the time she had left. Around them, the shelter workers who had gathered in silence wiped at their eyes, unable to look away. They had seen sorrow before. They had seen loss. But this was different. This was love in its purest, most heartbreaking form. This was devotion that refused to yield even to death, minutes stretched into eternity. The world continued on, wind whispering through the trees, distant stars blinking in the sky, the quiet hum of life persisting beyond this single moment. But for Seraphina, time had stopped. Elena ran her fingers through Seraphina's fur, her voice soft, soothing. "He's free now, sweetheart," she murmured. "He's at peace." Seraphina's ears twitched, but she did not lift her head. Peace? Peace had been in Valentino's presence. Peace had been in his eyes, in the way he moved beside her, in the rhythm of their steps when they danced. This was not peace. This was silence where music used to be. This was stillness where there had once been motion. Elena pressed her forehead to Seraphina's, just as she had done so many times before with both of them, whispering words of comfort neither of them truly believed. Then, something happened. A breeze, soft and steady, swept through the field, rustling the grass, sending a ripple through the air. It wasn't sharp or cold. It was gentle, almost warm, wrapping around them like an embrace. And as it passed, something stirred within Seraphina. Her muscles twitched, her paws flexed, and then, slowly, as if guided by an unseen force, she lifted herself onto her feet. Her legs felt lighter, steadier than they had moments ago. She turned her head slightly, ears pricked, as if listening to something no one else could hear. And then, ever so softly, she moved. A step forward, then another. Her body shifted into a familiar rhythm, one she had known all her life, one that had been imprinted into her very soul. The workers gasped, watching in awe as Seraphina began to dance. There was no music, no audience, no stage, only the whisper of the wind, the glow of the moon, and the lingering warmth of a love that refused to fade. But she was not alone. Though invisible to all but her, she felt him. Felt the gentle pressure of a guiding paw, felt the unspoken promise that had been made long ago. "You'll never dance alone." She closed her eyes, and in the darkness, she saw him. Valentino. Not frail, not tired, not weighed down by the years of suffering he had endured, but strong, radiant, just as he had been on the nights they danced beneath the stage lights. He moved beside her, leading her as he always had, their steps in perfect harmony. And as she twirled in the moonlight, as the wind carried her forward, the sorrow in her chest shifted. It did not disappear, but it became something else, something beautiful, something eternal. Elena watched, her breath caught in her throat, her tears still falling, but now for a different reason, because she understood. This was not goodbye. This was a promise fulfilled. And as Seraphina's final steps slowed, as the wind settled and the night embraced its quiet once more, she came to a stop, her body trembling, her breath uneven, but her heart was full. She turned, looking back at where Valentino had once been, and she smiled. Because she knew. He had never truly left, and he never would. The world did not stop. The sun still rose, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender. The wind still whispered through the trees, carrying secrets from distant lands. Life continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the sorrow that weighed heavily in Seraphina's chest. She remained at the rescue center, surrounded by kind faces and gentle hands. They gave her food, comfort, warmth. But no matter how much love they poured into her, there was an emptiness they could not fill, a space beside her that would forever remain vacant. Valentino was gone, and yet he wasn't. Some days when the sun hung low on the horizon and the sky turned the color of old memories, she would find herself moving. It would start with a single step, an instinct that pulled her forward, guiding her into a slow, deliberate rhythm. She would close her eyes, letting her body remember what her heart refused to forget. And then she would dance. Not for an audience, not for applause, but for him. Because somewhere, in the space between time and longing, she knew he was still watching. The others at the shelter would pause when they saw her, their conversations fading into hushed whispers. They did not understand. But they didn't have to. This was not for them. This was for the ghost of a promise, for the love that death could not erase, and as she moved, the wind would rise, swirling around her, carrying the scent of rain and the faintest hint of something familiar. Valentino. She danced until her body ached, until her breaths came in soft gasps. And when she finally stopped, when the world settled into quiet stillness once more, she would lift her head toward the sky and wait. For a whisper, for a sign, for the unshakable feeling that he had been there, dancing beside her. And every time, without fail, the wind would answer. Elena had tried to move on. She had devoted herself to the shelter, to the lives that still needed saving. But some nights, when sleep refused to come, she would find herself staring at the old photograph on her desk. Two pitbulls standing side by side, their eyes bright with devotion, their bodies poised mid-dance, Valentino and Seraphina, the stars of the show. Her heart ached at the thought of them, at the love they had shared, at the life they had been robbed of. And so, one evening, driven by an ache she could no longer ignore, she got into her car and started driving. She hadn't been back to the old circus grounds since the day Marco shut it down. She hadn't wanted to see what remained, to witness the decay of something that had once been so full of life. But that night, she had to go. The drive was long, the roads unfamiliar in the darkness. But when she finally arrived, stepping out of the car onto the cracked pavement, the memories rushed back like a flood. The entrance gate was rusted, the old banners torn and forgotten. The once vibrant marquee was now nothing more than tattered fabric, swaying in the evening breeze. She pushed open the doors of the main tent, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. The wooden stage stood just as she had left it, worn but standing, holding on to the ghosts of every performance that had once graced its surface. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat as she reached into her bag and pulled out a single white rose. With careful steps, she walked to the center of the stage and knelt down, placing the flower where Valentino and Seraphina had once danced. She exhaled shakily, then pulled out her phone, scrolling until she found the song, their song. She pressed play. The melody spilled into the silence, filling the empty space with something soft, something aching. The notes rose and fell, weaving through the air, bringing life to a stage that had long since been abandoned. And then, something happened. A breeze swept through the tent, curling around her, sending shivers down her spine. The dust along the wooden planks stirred, forming faint, shifting patterns, almost as if Elena's breath caught. It was impossible, and yet she swore she heard it. Soft footsteps, light, deliberate, moving in time with the music. She turned sharply, her eyes scanning the empty stage, her heart pounding against her ribs. There was no one there, but she knew. She could feel it. They were here, dancing, together. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not wipe them away. She only smiled, pressing a hand over her heart, letting the music carry her back to a time when the stage had been full, when two souls had moved in perfect harmony beneath the glow of golden lights. The song reached its final notes, fading into silence. And as it did, the wind died down. The air grew still. The moment was gone. But as Elena turned to leave, she caught one last glimpse. Just a trick of the light, perhaps, or a longing so strong that it had taken shape before her eyes. Two figures, a shadow of black, a whisper of white, dancing in the moonlight. Together. Forever. Epilogue. People say the circus is haunted, that on certain nights, if you listen closely, you can hear music playing in the distance, drifting through the wind like a half-forgotten dream. And if you're lucky, if you stand in just the right place beneath the old tent, where the past still lingers, you might hear it. The soft sound of paws gliding across the stage. Two souls still dancing. Two hearts still in rhythm. A love that never died. Some say love fades with time, that memories blur, that bonds weaken, that in the end we must let go. But not all love follows the rules of time. Some promises, no matter how impossible, are never broken. Seraphina never stopped waiting, and when fate brought Valentino back to her, even in his final moments, he kept his promise. He danced with her, just as he had vowed to, proving that love, real love, does not end when the body fails. It lingers in the quiet spaces, in the wind that brushes your skin, in the echoes of footsteps long gone. And even after Valentino was gone, he was never truly absent. Because some say, if you listen closely on certain nights, you can still hear them. Two pitbulls, moving together in the shadows, their love carried in the wind, their dance never ending. This is a story that reminds us that love is not measured in time, but in devotion. In the words of the great poet Rumi, "Goodbyes are only for those who love with their eyes, because for those who love with heart and soul, there is no such thing as separation." If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Veil Marks. Your support helps bring more meaningful stories like this to life. Let's work together to reach 1,000 followers, a goal that will allow me to create even better, more emotional, and high-quality content for you. Leave a comment below. Have you ever felt the presence of a love that never truly left? Your thoughts, your experiences, they matter. Together, let's keep these stories alive. Let's keep love alive. Love.